Welcome to today's organic office hours. My name is Tyler Hakes. Let me do a quick intro here, just for anyone who doesn't know me or isn't familiar with Optimus, my business. Um, I have been in content marketing, SEO, now AEO for going on 20 years. I've run Optimist, my agency and SEO and AEO consulting firm now for 10 years. And we've been working with all kinds of tech startups, software companies, helping them build organic growth engines. And so today I wanted to kick off this series, Organic Office Hours, to answer questions because frankly, what I'm hearing from conversations that I have with marketing leaders and prospects and current clients is there's just a lot of confusion. There's a lot of conflicting information about there, especially about AEO, GEO, optimizing for AI, etc. And so I want to try to answer those questions as best I can, give guidance, provide input, and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited to kick things off. First of all, if you're joining on the live stream, if you could just jump in the chat, post a comment so I can see who's here. I just want to make sure that the live stream is working and everything is flowing as planned. Give me just a second here while I pull up the event here on LinkedIn and just make sure again that it's working. Let me just pull this up. Okay, it seems to be working. So I think we're good there. One of the issues that I do have sometimes is that I can't see the chat. So I will kind of keep an eye on that over on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, if you're watching this live, please feel free to jump in the chat. Just let me know who's here. Say hello. I do want this to be like an interactive session. So I've got some questions that I am planning to kind of talk through based on conversations that I've been having. But most importantly, I want to answer your questions. So if you have questions about SEO, AEO, GEO, whatever the acronym du jour is this week, I want to try to answer those. So please feel free to drop those questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to all of them that I can during this session. Okay, so let's kick things off. As I said, really excited to jump into this. I think this is something that a lot of folks have been interested in having. So uh, let's start with the probably most pressing question and topic of this week, which is Google's guidelines on GEO. So let me just share my screen here. We'll pull up um, the post that has been making the rounds this week. Basically, this is what we're seeing from Google. So the real quick context here, if you're not familiar, Google released these guidelines or documentation regarding optimizing your website for generative AI. So basically, it's like the Google guide to GEO or AEO. By the way, I prefer the acronym AEO, but I use them pretty interchangeably, and I try to just roll with it. Okay, so the upshot from this report is basically that people have interpreted this to mean that GEO or AEO is essentially the same thing as SEO, or that there are no additional factors or things that you should be considering in terms of optimizing your website for AI versus optimizing your website for SEO. And you can see here, right, there's some language in here that I think is being maybe a little bit over extrapolated. So first of all, they say right here, best practices for SEO continue to be relevant because our generative AI features on Google search are rooted in our core search ranking and quality systems. Okay, so let's just pause there and let's just parse this sentence, because again, I think this is where people are sort of misinterpreting this statement and some of the other statements in here to basically mean SEO equals AEO or GEO, right? Like they're the same thing. There's no difference, et cetera, et cetera. Really, if you look at the content of this sentence, first of all, best practices for SEO continue to be relevant, right? Doesn't say they are the only thing that matters. It says that they are relevant. I think that's 100% true. We'll talk a little bit about kind of our philosophy and our approach to AEO and what we've seen working with our clients. But there's no doubt SEO fundamentals, the basics of SEO, are still important, right? The much of the mechanisms by which these AI engines surface content, make recommendations, cite specific sources, come from sort of the basics of SEO. So yes, 100% agreement. Like there's no doubting that like you still need to have the strong SEO fundamentals in place. And in fact, this is one of the things that I advise a lot of clients on is, don't throw away your SEO strategy to pursue an AI strategy, right? They should work together. They should be an integrated approach to organic discoverability across both traditional search and now AI, or AI LLMs, AI surfaces. Okay. Secondly, I want to just draw attention to this bit, right? So generative AI features in Google search, right? So this is specifically talking about, first of all, Google's AI surfaces, which would include AI overviews, AI mode, and potentially Gemini, although they don't really refer to Gemini as far as I know in this document. So that's an important caveat as well, right? Because Google is obviously one player here. Like they aren't setting guidelines for optimizing for ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or any of the other AI surfaces, right? So keep in mind that as we read these guidelines and as we sort of interpret what they mean, ultimately they are sort of speaking about their AI products. The other thing to keep in mind here, right, is like Google is always trying to steer us towards like general web friendly practices. Now that I'm not an advocate for, do the quick growth hacks and stuff that work right now, but will get you penalized down the road. But keep in mind that like Google is going to steer you towards like very, very safe and neutral practices, right? That's what they've always done in terms of SEO. We've seen for years, they'll publish guidelines about SEO that tells you, hey, don't do this, but then on the flip side, they reward that. Again, I don't think we should be pursuing things that are malevolent in order to sort of juice our SEO rankings or our AI visibility. But it's important to keep in mind that Google is not going to give you a full playbook of here's exactly how to optimize your website today based on what actually works. Okay, that's my first couple of caveats here. The next thing I want to focus on here is, basically the upshot of this article is like it's basically laying out like SEO best practices, right? So it's talking about following your meeting search technical requirements, crawling best practices, using semantic HTML, not making sure that you're following best practices with JavaScript and making sure that your web page is being rendered in such a way that the crawlers can index it, all this stuff. Okay, great. Let's talk about this section here. Myth busting generative AI search, what you don't need to do, which I think is a great a great framing. So first of all, LLMs.text, man, I don't know why we're still having this debate, but the short answer here, my understanding from everything that I've seen and read and understood is that LLMs.text file, which if you're not familiar, it's sort of like the LLM equivalent of like a robots.txt, right? The idea is that we're going to create a file that's specifically for LLMs. It's going to sort of tell them about our business, maybe direct how they should crawl and understand our website, things like that. Okay, I haven't seen any evidence that we need this. Google specifically is saying they don't care about it. There's a little bit of conflicting evidence here because Google Lighthouse this week put out some guidelines about LLMs.txt. Either way, I think, for the most part, it's one of those things. It's like you probably don't need it. It's probably not going to hurt to have it if you really feel strongly about it. So anyway, my personal opinion on that. Let's talk about this next one, chunking content. Okay, so this is something that I've talked about in the past, and I've actually recorded kind of a video like breaking this down. So I think this is a term again that gets really misunderstood and misinterpreted. So the idea of like chunking content basically means to like format your content in such a way that that it is in chunks essentially, right? So if you take any given passage of content from your website, can you sort of understand what it's talking about without the full context of the rest of the article? So self-contained passages, using specific language and sort of clarifying the the subject that you're talking about within any given sentence or paragraph, right? It's basically just like very clear, ultra clear writing, okay? Um, and structure. So headings, content, paragraphs, sentence level, right? How is the content actually constructed? Now, one thing that people have again misconstrued, in my opinion, is that this means that you should take your content, chop it up into a bunch of little pieces, and like publish a bunch of content targeting, let's say like a fan out query that ChatGPT uses when it's recommending the best content marketing agencies or whatever. I think that's a bad practice. I think that's actually what this passage is referring to. I don't think that Google would argue that having very clear and having very clear content structure is bad. I think that chunking in that sense, I think only serves SEO, AI, and readers well. So I think chunking at that basic level is going to continue to make sense. I mean, it's basically just good writing and also stems from what we've learned about SEO best practices in general for years. So I think the disconnect here is like, what does chunking actually mean in practice? I think it's page level sort of content structure optimization and not like a strategic website architecture where you're trying to like target very specific micro queries with specific targeted pages. I think that's a bad practice. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that if we get to the that question here in a bit, because that's one question that I get a lot is like, what do we do with fan out queries, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's chunking content. Relatedly, rewriting content just for AI systems, seeking inauthentic mentions, over focusing on structured data. So basically what Google is saying here, my interpretation of what Google is saying here is like, hey guys, like don't dramatically change what you're doing from a content strategy perspective to try to juice your AI visibility metrics, which I think is, again, blanket guidance. Great, makes a ton of sense. But I think the interpretation that this means there is nothing else you can do besides basic SEO to optimize your website for AI is wrong. I mean, that interpretation is wrong. And I can tell you, based on the experience that we've seen, what we know about LLMs, and the work that we've done with clients, like there are other levers that go beyond basic SEO best practices that can improve your SEO visibility. So let me just pull up some content that we've written on this topic, because I think that will help sort of clarify some of the things that we think about when we work with clients and how we sort of approach it. So this is an article that we wrote, AEO versus GEO versus SEO, right? So first and foremost, let me just say this. Again, I'm team AEO, but use whatever acronym you want. We consider AEO and GEO the same thing, and then SEO is sort of a related but separate topic, right? So here's the basic Venn diagram of how we think about SEO versus AEO or GEO, which is that, yes, you have these like keyword targeting, on-page optimization, all of this technical site health stuff that still matters, right? We still want to think about all of these things. But the AEO basically introduces new factors that we probably wouldn't think about in a standard or traditional SEO strategy. Okay. So things like this answer first formatting, you might argue, hey, that is also related to SEO. That might be true. But we also have things like citation signal strength, entity disambiguation, brand messaging consistency, right? So these are factors that we have seen across our work with clients that matter, right? They matter a lot in terms of how you show up in AI, like how clear is your brand messaging. But if you're just thinking about SEO, you probably don't think about, hey, how clear is our brand messaging across our LinkedIn profile and our G2 profile and our homepage? Do we have a clear about page, right? Because SEO is generally, right, that there's sort of the site level strategy, but most of the work that goes into like optimizing your website for search has been page level, right? We want to optimize the content itself to try to rank that specific page for this specific keyword. AEO is really like brand, right? So I think if we're going to make a sort of a broad claim here about, AEO versus SEO, I think really the takeaway here is that there are not really any new factors here entirely, because many of the AEO factors would bleed into your general marketing, your brand marketing, how consistent is your messaging, those types of things. But again, if we just look at it through the SEO lens, we totally miss those things, right? So I think that's the disconnect in my mind, is that, from an AEO perspective, we see time and time again our work on our website with our clients, everything that we've done around AEO and optimizing for AI. There's just another layer of factors here that you wouldn't think about if you're just pursuing a traditional SEO strategy. So I think the idea that, hey, just focus on SEO, it's going to lead directly to AI visibility. I think that's demonstrably false, right? There are many examples out there of companies that have great SEO performance and they're invisible in AI, or at least they underperform many of their smaller competitors in AI, right? And I think, again, that comes down to these factors here that are sort of outside the lens of traditional SEO. So you can have a great SEO program and still underperform in AI because you're not considering these factors, because you have broader brand or messaging issues that create confusion, or don't clarify your entity as a brand, and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about this really quick. Let me just pop over here to the chat, 'cause I think I saw some comments maybe coming in. Maybe. Okay, sending hearts. Okay, LLMs.text and brand.json is about controlling what LLMs use for your business a bit more. Yeah. Oh, hey, John Sebastian. Hey, good to see you. Yeah, I think you're right. So John Sebastian says he thinks LLM.text and brand.json is about controlling what LLMs use for your business a bit more. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Like I said before, I think the concept behind LLMs.txt is basically like, it's basically an about page in most of the direction that I've seen, right? So it's basically like, let's lay out exactly what our brand is. Let's lay out exactly what we do. Let's try to like sort of influence how LLMs talk about us. Again, I think of that as part of like brand messaging and consistency. In my experience, you can achieve basically the same thing with like a very structured about page, or we see people more frequently creating a page called like info for AI. And it's basically just like an end to end, very robust and detailed about page that says, here's who we are as a brand. Here are the features of our product. Here are the customers that we serve. Here are the problems that we solve, in one very clear narrative, right? And so you can deploy that via an LLMs.txt file, for example. But I personally haven't seen any evidence that like you need to have the LLMs.txt file, or that it's better than just publishing that on a web page on your website. But yeah, love that clarification, and happy to answer any additional questions about that. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into some of the specific differences that we see in AEO versus SEO, right? So we talked about some of these factors. Okay, so here's the framework that we use. We won't go through this whole thing because it's too complicated to get into on this live stream right now. But basically, first and foremost, the thing that I mentioned before, our approach, we call this the complete organic revenue engine. It's our framework for SEO, an integrated SEO and AEO strategy, which first and foremost, I think is the most important fundamental thing that you should know when you're thinking about AEO. Is that these things should be an integrated strategy, right? You should not pursue a separate AEO strategy that potentially cannibalizes or damages your SEO strategy. We've seen this happen with a lot of companies where they've sort of chased the fad tactics that work, sometimes only for a short period of time, to boost AI visibility. And in doing so, they sort of destroy their SEO program entirely. Now, yes, traffic coming from traditional search is in decline, but I would not throw that in the garbage personally. And we also know that SEO visibility correlates in many ways with AEO visibility. I'm not going to get into that at the moment, but happy to answer questions on it. Okay, so what are the differences? So the main things here, again, is it comes down to the clarity of the messaging and the specificity within your content that matter more from an AI perspective than they do from an SEO perspective, right? So let's just take an example, right? You could write an article about what is content marketing on your website. You publish it, you've optimized it for SEO, and it could rank really well from a search perspective. But when we think about the AEO, or the AI visibility side of that, our goal is not to rank, right? So we can't just focus on like, how do we check all the boxes on the page? What we actually have to think about is, how do we connect this topic to our brand? Okay. And what that means is that we need to have a clear narrative that connects the problems that buyers face to the solution category that we want to own, and then to our product within that solution category. Okay, and so we talk about this in terms of problem anchoring, solution clarity, and definitive positioning. So let me just scroll down here a little further and we'll talk about this. So first of all, the entity and brand consistency is a big part of this. We already touched on this a little bit, but basically, again, if you think about pure SEO, you generally aren't thinking about like, how clear is my brand entity across all of my third-party profiles and stuff. Maybe some SEOs are thinking about that. Maybe your broader marketing team is thinking about that, but it's really important from an AEO perspective. So that's one thing, aligning those messages. So let's talk about narrative clarity. So narrative clarity is basically like, as an AI understands your content and your business, how well does it understand the actual problems that you solve, and how clear is the through line from the buyer's problem to the solution category to your specific solution. Okay. And so this again is something that maybe SEOs should have been thinking about for all time, but it was not always part of a standard SEO strategy, right? Because it doesn't kind of fit neatly into the checkbox checklist of SEO practices. So something like this would just be, in terms of like, let's say you write an article about how to reduce your procurement cycle time, and you cover, here's 10 strategies for reducing your procurement cycle time or whatever, right? Most SEO strategies historically has sort of stopped there, right? You basically cover the topic, and then maybe you tack on like a CTA. I think in the AEO world, when we think about AI, what we're seeing that works and is really important here is sort of extending that narrative, taking that narrative all the way from, here's your problem, it's procurement, your procurement cycle time is too high. Here are some strategies for addressing that. And now here is like a category of solutions that help solve that. Let's say it's procurement automation software or whatever. And here's some things that you should know about procurement automation software. And then here is our business, right? Procurement X or whatever our company is called, and the specific features that we offer that will help address that initial problem, right? So we're completing the narrative and the journey, ideally within a single page. So this is the difference, is that we're not creating sort of fragmented content at top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. Instead, we're thinking about, okay, we're addressing a reader who's coming in at the top of the funnel. They're talking about a problem. They're trying to understand a pain point they have. And we want to explain and lay out that entire narrative from top of the funnel all the way through to the actual product. Connect all of those dots so that it's clear for readers, but also because it helps AI sort of understand and anchor your business, your product, your brand to the actual problems that you solve. Okay, so that's narrative clarity. Content coverage is another big one. I mean, this is not really anything new. This is part of why AEO and SEO need to be an integrated approach, is that, basically if you don't have content on your website that addresses a specific problem you solve, then obviously AI is not going to recommend you. If somebody says, hey, I have this problem, can you recommend some software into ChatGPT? So that's a big one. We've got content and cluster architecture. Again, very similar. On-page foundations, content structure and extractability. So here's again, you could argue that this sort of stems from SEO best practices, but I think there's sort of a new layer of complexity and sophistication that we need to be thinking about in terms of how we actually structure the content on the page to help AI understand the content, basically, right? I don't think, we don't need to spoon feed AI. It's a smart system, like it understands context and things, but the simpler we make it, the more likely it is that we will sort of get the results that we're looking for, as well as have control over the actual message pull through that shows up in the LLM responses. Okay. So the last thing that I'll mention here is like evidence and citation signals. Again, there's some evidence here that this is like, kind of a carryover from traditional SEO, but basically, how credible and reputable is your actual content on the page? How many different sources do you cite? Do you have any first party data? Is there first party quotes, testimonials, that kind of thing? Okay. So again, this is not a radical departure from SEO, right? I want to just clarify that one more time. I think SEO is still the foundation here. We want to create content. We want to own the topics that are most relevant to our business, but we need to think about this slightly more holistically, I would say. And when you think about that, things like narrative clarity, how well are we anchoring our brand to the specific problems that we solve? Solution specificity or category ownership, right? How well do we associate our brand with the specific solution categories in which we want to compete? And then this article doesn't really cover it, but the other key thing that we talked about in the framework is definitive positioning. So how clearly and consistently do we position ourselves versus our competitors within this solution category? Okay, so this is one where things get a little wild. We'll talk about best X listicles here in just a moment. But basically, people are out there saying, hey, we're the best procurement software and we're the best spend management software and we're the best this other software. Okay, maybe you're the best at some of those things, but we really need to get very specific about why we're the best. In which specific cases are we the best, right? Because most of the conversations that are happening where people are doing commercial discovery with an LLM, like a ChatGPT or whatever, it's not just what's the best spend management platform, period. It's, hey, here's my specific guidance, or ChatGPT already knows a bunch about my business from past interactions. And so there's a lot of like specific detail and nuance that's going into these recommendations. And so you want to be thinking about that in terms of your positioning and how clear is your positioning uh, on those competitive pages, but also across all of your content, right? So again, if we think about a problem, like a top of the funnel article where we're addressing a problem, and it leads all the way through to here's how our product helps, that positioning also needs to align with the positioning that we're using on the best X listicle or on our LinkedIn page, right? So again, we've got this like extra layer of consistency, structure, narrative that really goes above and beyond SEO best practices. All right, let me get off my soapbox there for a minute. Let me just show a couple of our case studies. So one of the things, quick preface here, which is that, I I actually didn't publish any AEO case studies for a long time because I was there's a lot of factors that go into AI visibility, and to claim, hey, we did this and it led to this specific outcome, I think is a little bit disingenuous. So we tried to kind of be clear and transparent about, hey, we did these things, we saw this increase that was correlated with those changes, but there are a lot of other factors that go into, do I show up in AI, how do I show up in AI, when do I show up in AI, all of those things. Anyway, let me share some of these case studies. Oh, my sharing is broken. Give me 1 second. Okay, so a couple of case studies that we've published on our website about the work that we've done with clients on AEO. So this first one, right, is like a B2B tech company. Again, this is like a prime example where this is an established B2B technology company. They've been around for decades. They had a pretty strong content and SEO program. They had lots of rankings, etc. But they were not showing up hardly at all in AI. And so what we did is like we came in and we basically looked at the factors that we just talked about. And we said, okay, where are the gaps? Like, what are we actually missing here that works for SEO, but is not working on the AI side, or we're not seeing the same results in AI on AI services. And so for this particular client, it came down to things like internal expertise, data, specific data. So they didn't have hardly any like cited data or sources for many of their claims, right? So their content, again, was sort of good enough for SEO, but it wasn't sort of meeting the bar to be cited or to be referenced in LLMs. And because of that, they were seeing low overall AI visibility, low referral traffic, but more importantly, a low volume of recommendations. We'll talk about recommendations versus citations maybe in a bit. But the point here is, we sort of overhauled their content program to incorporate some of these new factors. And based on all of this work that we did, or again, correlated with the work that we did, to be completely fair and transparent, we saw a huge uptick in both LLM referral traffic, but more importantly, actual revenue coming directly from LLMs. Now, in this case, we're not taking into account sort of the halo effect, if you will, of increased brand traffic or direct traffic. We're just looking at referrals directly from LLMs and the revenue there. The upshot here is that the LLM revenue grew 49x in these 14 months, right? So based on these changes, and again, case in point, right? This is a company that had a strong SEO performance. Like if you looked at their website on Ahrefs, you'd probably be like, hey, they're killing it. They've got a ton of rankings. They've got a lot of content that shows up in search. That probably translates to AI. It didn't, right? It was not in their case. And so again, I think just to make that point one more time, like you can be doing all the things right from an SEO perspective and still not be getting the same results that you would expect for AI. So that's my point there. I'm actually not going to dive in. We've got some other case studies on the website, so if you want to check them out, feel free to dive into those. But basically, we've done a decent amount of work with a lot of different clients on AEO, and we see this pattern pretty consistently. That yes, there's overlap here. Yes, SEO is still fundamental and foundational. Do I think just focusing on SEO will lead directly to AI results? Not necessarily. Okay. End of rant. Let me just pop over here because I see some more comments coming in. Unfortunately, they're not being pulled into my Riverside, so I've got to kind of handle these asynchronously. Always beat rate sheets when you don't know. Something I can't wrap my head around is how do you control brand consistency across all platforms? Okay, so Estelle's got some questions for me. So Estelle says, something I can't wrap my mind around is how do you control brand consistency across all platforms? Sometimes you appear on different forums or specialized websites that you just don't control. Short answer is you can't, right? That's absolutely a problem. You cannot control every mention of your website, especially if you're a big established brand. But there are sort of things within your control and things outside of your control. So for most of our clients, the first thing that we focus on, depending on the current state of their website and their messaging and all the things that we just talked about, is control the stuff you can control. Your current website, all the messaging on it, all of the profiles that you control on LinkedIn, on G2, on Capterra, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure all of those are consistent as possible. Then you can sort of extend that, right? So what are some properties that we maybe don't have right now, but we can establish to kind of strengthen that signal one level further, right? So maybe we don't have a Twitter or X profile. Okay, let's create one so that we can deploy the same messaging there and sort of establish that as like our canonical positioning. Maybe we can create a subreddit that's dedicated to our brand. We don't necessarily have to invest a ton of time or energy into running a subreddit, but we want to establish again that our messaging in sort of as many places as we can realistically maintain and control. Anything outside of that, right? You can do things like reach out to companies who've published a listicle and ask them to adjust the way that they talk about your brand, things like that. I personally don't spend a lot of cycles on that. I think there's a ton of things that you do control that in most cases are not optimal in my experience. And so I try to focus on that first and foremost. What are the things that we can control 100%? And let's spend our time there first and foremost. And then sort of as like a future endeavor, we might think about how do we expand that circle further and reach out to some of these other third-party placements or adjust them. But I think there's a lot more levers in most cases than people think about that are within their control. So I think focus there first and foremost. Love the question. So thanks, Estelle. Blair, hey Blair, good to see you. She says, for me, it feels like SEO plus content marketer. In 10x marketing formula by Garrett Moon, he says that you should always include your niche in the market, what you do and how it applies to you that no one else can say. That feels like how to attack writing for AEO, which some SEOs have gotten away from. 100%. Blair, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think that there are a litany of reasons why we've sort of gotten away from the level of clarity and specificity that I think we need to have in like this AEO era. But yeah, I mean, I think basically, we've a lot of companies, a lot of teams, a lot of marketers have sort of moved away from that, right? Sometimes it's like because there's a hard guideline internally that like our top of the funnel content is only educational and we can never talk about our product because we have like this very strict rule about it or whatever. Understand, I know that there are different approaches to content marketing. My personal opinion is every page on your website, if you're investing in content marketing, should be selling your product. But that's, that's a philosophical question maybe for another time. But yeah, I totally agree, Blair. I think, we need to sort of get back to that level of how do we lay out this very clear narrative, ideally on every page and in every context, to really establish that consistent structure and narrative that we're trying to put into the market. Okay, so first of all, Pop, more questions in the channel, feel free, or in the chat, please. I'll pop over to LinkedIn here periodically to see what's happening there. In the meantime, I want to touch on something else that that I talked about briefly here, which is citations versus recommendations. So this is another question that I get a lot from folks, and I think there's, frankly, I would say some intentionally misleading information out there. I hate to say that, but let me just show you, kind of what I'm talking about. So again, I'm going to reference some of our content here just because we've got some visuals and stuff here. Okay, so here's the upshot, right? So when you think about AEO and sort of measuring your visibility within AI surfaces, two things usually get conflated, but I think we should think about these as separate goals and ultimately separate but related strategies. And that's mentions versus citations. Okay. So if you scroll your LinkedIn feed, you're going to see all, a million data studies that people have like put together and published out there about, hey, this is the top cited website, or, the brands that get cited the most do this or whatever. Okay. So first of all, my personal opinion is that people way over index on citations. Okay. Chasing citations is good. I think it has sort of a knock-on effect, and it can increase your overall visibility. Sometimes citations are correlated with mentions and recommendations, but the main takeaway, in my opinion, is that citations are a secondary goal when it comes to AEO. So if we're chasing tactics only to increase the number of citations that we are earning, I think we're chasing the wrong thing. I think that's basically like the equivalent of like traffic, vanity metrics for traffic and SEO. Citations are kind of the modern version of that. All right. And so what I think is really more important is the mentions, right? So how often are we actually being mentioned or recommended in like commercial discovery context? That's the stuff that's going to actually drive demand and pipeline and leads and revenue from AI. Like, yes, a citation could drive revenue in the same way that my what is content marketing article might drive revenue somewhere down the line. But realistically, the highest impact strategy that you can focus on here is like, how do we get recommended more frequently by ChatGPT, right? And that strategy, that like function, is different from the function of just getting cited. Okay, so what we know from all of this data is that these things overlap, first and foremost, right? Just to be clear, they're not totally separate, but the things that generally support an increase in citations are very tactical content structural things, right? So the things like that we talked about before: answer first formatting, self-contained answer blocks, schema, citation architecture. These levers are most strongly correlated with increasing citations, which again is good, but it's probably not going to drive people to your door ready to buy your product, right? So the thing that's going to make a bigger difference for driving actual demand and revenue, sorry, my phone's ringing, is focusing on mentions and recommendations. And again, this is where we have to really zoom out, because the factors that tend to correlate with how frequently is your brand being recommended by ChatGPT or Perplexity as a solution to a real buyer who's in the market, it comes down to things like entity disambiguation, right? So how clear is the entity that is your brand on the web? Do these systems understand what you are, what you do, who you serve, the problems that you solve, those types of sort of messaging and narrative factors, right? That's part of the entity disambiguation. So again, messaging consistency across your property, across your properties that you own and control, category positioning, competitive differentiation, right? This is all the stuff that we were just talking about in terms of the framework, right? These are the factors that, in my experience, in our work with our on our own website, as well as all of the clients that we've worked with over the last 2 or 3 years on AEO work, it comes down to this stuff, right? It comes down to the narrative, the content itself. Like, what are we actually putting out into the market about ourselves? What are we saying about our business and our brand? That is much more likely to drive mentions and recommendations than this like tactical work on the page level, which is going to drive citations. So I think they're both important. I think they are both can be valuable. But if I had a limited budget, if I could only invest in one of these two things, I would definitely focus on the left side of this Venn diagram and this overlap area, right? Claim grounding, first party data and research, expert attribution, this type of stuff that's going to make establish a clear um, message about our brand that we can put out into the market. It's going to make our content, our website, and our pages more reliable from an LLM's perspective, and it's going to improve the chances that when a buyer actually asks for recommendations or is doing commercial discovery within an LLM or an AI surface, that you'll show up in the right contexts, right? So I think that's another big area where I think people are sort of misunderstanding or they're conflating these two things. The last thing I'll mention here is that, like, as you see these studies float across, the latest growth hack or whatever that comes across as like a thing, hey, if you just, put grapefruit in your article, you're 10 times more likely to be cited or whatever. Be skeptical and also try to parse, like, are they measuring citations only? Are they looking at mentions or recommendations? Because again, these two things are connected. But in my experience, they are not a one-to-one situation, right? So you can be cited a lot and not recommended hardly at all, and vice versa, although it hardly ever happens in that order. But again, chasing only citations or focusing on practices that are correlated with citations only kind of leaves the bigger picture untouched. Okay, so that's mentions versus citations. Next thing I want to talk about is we talked about the LLMs.text, so I'm not going to touch on that. I want to talk a little bit about fan out queries. Before I do that, let me pop over to the chat here and see if we've got any other questions. Still doing this manually. So true. So much room to streamline here. Great framework. Thanks. Thanks, Comfort. Appreciate your comment there. Let me just refresh here and see if there's any other questions coming into the chat. I don't see anything, but if you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will talk through them. Okay, so the next question that I hear a lot from folks that I talk to about AEO and clients that we work with is basically, what are fan out queries and, like, what do we actually do with these things? Which I think is also tied into a bigger question, which is basically like, what should our actual AEO strategy look like, right? We've already talked about, like, all these factors, but, like, if we again sort of zoom all the way out, like, is AEO part of SEO? Is it a separate strategy? How should we be pursuing it? I think I've already answered this, but just to restate, they should be part of the same strategy, right? You should have an integrated SEO and AEO strategy. You are creating content that ranks in search and also helps to improve your visibility within AI. They are not separate streams. Okay, that's my opinion, but I think, backed by lots of research and work that we've done, and also lots of case studies. If you look on the web of people who have sort of pivoted all the way into AI and sort of thrown their SEO strategy out the window and sort of predictably seen poor results, or maybe temporarily good results followed by poor results afterwards. Okay, so let's talk about fan out queries. All right, so first of all, let me just clarify what a fan out query is in case you're not aware. So fan out queries are the queries that LLMs use when researching before they generate a response. Okay, so sorry, that was a bad explanation, but let me just switch my screen here and we'll sort of look at, like, a real world example. Okay, so if you go to ChatGPT and you say, what's the best AI contract management tool for buy side firms, for example, ChatGPT in many cases, not always, is going to basically do a bunch of searches, right? It's going to go out and it's going to look at content on the web to put together its answer grounded in sort of recent information. All right. So this is how it kind of goes beyond the training data. This is what you call RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which basically just means, like, ChatGPT is searching the web before it gives you a response. Okay. And so one of the levers here as we think about AEO is we want to appear when ChatGPT does a search, because ChatGPT is likely to cite that source, and it also is likely to pull in content from those sources when it generates a response. So it's sort of like SEO but for AI bots, right? And so the question then becomes, how do we do that? How do we actually appear in the queries that AI is using to surface information before it generates a response? Now, the short answer here is like this is SEO, right? This is SEO because Google or ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these other tools, they're basically searching the web. There's some, I don't know if we've settled whether they use Google or Bing or whatever, but basically they're searching the web. So SEO matters here. Like if our page ranks for the specific query that they're searching, we're much more likely to get included in the consideration set. We're likely to be cited as a source. We're likely to be recommended if somebody's asking a commercial discovery question. So then the question is like, what do we actually do with these specific fan out queries? The challenge here is that these queries are not static, right? So ChatGPT is basically generating these queries behind the scenes each time somebody types in this question. Even if they use the exact same prompt, the queries that AI is going to use are going to be slightly different. Secondly, they're very specific long tail queries in almost every case, right? So these are not things that you're likely to see in a traditional like keyword research tool, for example, right? So, top CLM platforms for private equity 2026. I don't know. Maybe that does show up somewhere in Ahrefs or SEMrush, but realistically, these are again very long tail, and we also don't want to just like say, okay, that's the keyword. Let's go optimize for that because that query is going to change from session to session, from user to user. So, what do we actually do with this? First and foremost, pretty much a hard rule for me is like I recommend clients never create content specifically for AEO. Okay. So what do I mean? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is don't look at these fan out queries and say, okay, ChatGPT searching for top CLM platforms for private equity 2026. We should create a page called top CLM platforms for private equity 2026. Because all the reasons I just mentioned, right? Like this is layers and layers of probabilistic generation that's happening here. And so if you're sort of trying to target this specific page or this specific topic that ChatGPT used one time, that's a moving target, right? You're trying to target, you're trying to hit a moving target, which is going to be impossible. But more importantly, this query that ChatGPT is using almost certainly overlaps with a topic that you would target anyway, right? So maybe you're not targeting this exact long tail phrase, but if you're in this space, you probably have a page that's top CLM platforms, right? And maybe top CLM platforms for private equity, even, right? Depending on what the search data shows and the keyword data shows. So the point being, do not create a page to target these fan out queries. That's my recommendation. Instead, identify the patterns within these fan out queries and then use that to add specific content to the pages that you already have. Okay, so once again, if let's say we've got a top CLM platforms page and we see that across all of these different queries from all these different models, you know, the fan out queries tend to be about CLM platforms with specific features or CLM platforms for specific buyer segments or whatever, then we might add some content onto our existing page to say, hey, we're great for private equity, or maybe an FAQ that says, what are the best CLM platforms specifically for private equity firms, right? The idea here is that we want to understand the patterns rather than targeting or trying to target a specific query. Because again, these queries are going to change. We've seen this over and over again, right? If I run the same exact prompt through the same exact model today, the fan out queries that ChatGPT uses will be different. So if we are targeting like a very specific long tail keyword and trying to create a page for that specific keyword, it's too late, right? We already missed it because that search already happened. Now there's certainly overlap over time, but the point is that these are moving targets. These are also there's a lot of overlap with the existing content. There's also overlap with the specific queries that these models are using. And so this, by the way, this thing that we're looking at here, this is the output of like it's an anonymized example of a roadmap that we built for a client. But basically what we do with these fan out queries is we analyze them and we group them into topics. So we look at what are the questions that AI is asking before it generates a response, and then how do we make sure that we have content that addresses those questions again on an existing page. So in this case, right, we've got fan out FAQs. So this is like where we're taking those fan out queries, we are analyzing them, grouping them into broad themes, and then translating that into an FAQ. So that's one way that you can target those fan out queries without sort of playing whack-a-mole by trying to create a bunch of pages on your website that target these like ephemeral queries that ChatGPT uses. So, just an example, right? Hey, look, if somebody is looking for the best AI contract review tools for financial service firms, right? We've already got a page about AI contract review. And so rather than creating a new page for this, we think that this is the best place to put this content, essentially in an FAQ on this existing page targeting this existing higher volume keyword. Okay, now that's not the solution every single time, but as a general practice, I think that's the best way to go about fan out queries, because I think a lot of people are very confused about that. I think a lot of people, see this idea of fan out queries and either they don't understand what it means at all, or they're like, okay, does that mean I should create a page for every single fan out query? Again, short answer, in my opinion, is no. I think you target it. You create targeted, specific content to optimize for those fan out queries on existing pages. I will say one other thing, right, is that sort of the closer that you can get to the specific language of the queries that these LLMs tend to use, the more likely you are to appear, right? Because if you perform a very long tail search and someone's web page has basically that same exact question as an FAQ, it's very likely that you will rank at the top, right? That's how search generally works, especially when you're talking about like a very long tail nuanced keyword, and you have sort of like phrase matched that concept. So that's what we're ultimately trying to do here is sort of in a roundabout way. Like we're not trying to target one specific query, but we are trying to sort of understand the pattern and target the language and the question that the LLMs are trying to understand before they generate a response. Okay, so that's fan out queries. Those are some of the main questions that I get on calls, at least recently. Let me just first of all let me check the chat one more time, and then let me also pull up some of my other questions, because I've been I've been sort of stockpiling some of the questions that I get, and hopefully helping to kind of answer those. Let me just see what I can find here. Okay. Okay, so some other questions. Let's see. The first question. Okay, so the other question, one of the other questions that we get a lot is, what's sort of the impact of AEO, AI, etc. How do we measure it? How long is it going to take? Those types of questions. Okay, typical marketing answer is it depends, but the realistic answer from what we've seen, first of all, how do you measure it? Right. I think this is a thing where we're basically trying to triangulate the results. So certainly we want to look at like our AI visibility, right? So these are like the top level metrics. This is essentially like your keyword rankings, which, by the way, you shouldn't track your ranking within an LLM because it's too unreliable. So for example, some people try to say, hey, are we being recommended number 1 or number 2 by ChatGPT? It's really hard to triangulate that. Realistically, I would just focus on like how frequently are we being recommended. Anyway, sorry, side tangent. But the main things that we want to focus on when we're tracking AI visibility, first of all, it's basically like a triangulation between visibility. So how frequently are we being recommended, ideally within commercial, or within commercial discovery situations, and then how does that correlate with a sort of a set of metrics that we use to understand how that like works downstream, right? So what we should see is, hey, our mention rate or our like brand visibility is going up. That's, it's a directional metric. There's not really like a single number. You're never going to get to 100% usually. But, is that number going up? And then in looking at the correlated metrics, we want to understand, first of all, obviously any referral traffic that we can track through to leads or pipeline or revenue, that's great. But we know that that's only a sliver, right? Because most people aren't going to click a link straight out of ChatGPT and come to your website. Instead, they're going to see you get recommended, and then maybe next week they Google you or whatever. So we want to look at referral traffic, but we also want to look at branded search traffic. As our recommendation rate rises, generally speaking, we should see a lift in branded search traffic from folks who do the things that I just said, right? See you in ChatGPT and then Google you later. The other thing that we want to look at is direct traffic. Now, we can't necessarily take credit for all the direct traffic, but what we should see, or what we tend to see most frequently, is again, as the rate of recommendation rises, we tend to see a correlated increase in direct traffic and ideally conversions, leads, revenue, pipeline, etc., coming from direct sources. So those are kind of the three metrics. And we basically, we sort of sit those things side by side and we say, okay, hey, the mention rate went up. And at the same time, our branded search traffic and revenue from branded search also went up. Generally, depending on how complex your marketing your marketing strategy is, it can be hard to necessarily like one-to-one untangle those things. But for a lot of companies, it's a pretty clear and obvious pattern, right? You can see, like, as we invest money in improving our visibility, we see that show up in terms of the metrics and the conversions and the revenue and the pipeline that we're seeing. So that's the main question about how do we measure it. The second question that I always get is like, how long does this take? The short answer is it's faster than SEO. Generally speaking, we see focused, targeted improvements tend to lead to results potentially within like 2 to 3 weeks, or at least like measurable results. Not that we're going to go from 0 to 100, but that we can start to see that being reflected in LLMs. Depends obviously on the state of your business, kind of where you're at, how established you are, what the problems are that we're addressing. But those are we can generally see that pretty quickly. That's one of the benefits of LLMs, is that like the turnaround time is very fast. We see the results of that work showing up in our metrics pretty quickly in a lot of cases. Not every case, but a lot of times. With that said, let me pull up a recent post that I shared about one of the B2B clients that we worked with. Oh, it's taking me to the wrong place. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so this was a case study, not really a case study. It was like sort of just a snapshot that I shared on LinkedIn. But basically, the upshot was it's a B2B company that we worked with. They had an established SEO program, but they weren't really seeing much in terms of AI visibility, and we were able to lift their visibility really, honestly, sort of astonishingly quickly, in my opinion. So let me just pull this up here. Okay, so here's the takeaway. Basically, it took us 21 days to go from 0 visibility using the same prompts in the same exact like reporting and mechanism. We went from 0 to 4.2% in 21 days. Now, that's not necessarily a mind-blowing percentage in this particular case. I think a reasonable sort of benchmark based on the competitors is like 30 to 40%. So got a ways to go. But again, to go from 0 to 42 or 4.2% recommendation rate, as well as, by the way, a 5.3% citation rate across this set of buyer prompts, which is 100 total data points, right? So this is not like a definitive study by any means, but we can see the turnaround time here, right? We can see sort of how quickly these results start to compound. In this case, what we focused on, I mentioned it in the post, but basically, we did sort of that brand consistency audit that we talked about before. We aligned and realigned some of the messaging that had gotten out of sync across different surfaces and properties that this brand controlled. We rewrote some of their website messaging, or really we worked with them as they rewrote some of their website messaging. We launched 3 targeted commercial pages that were basically missing and kind of filled in some of these gaps that they had, as well as 2 comparison posts. And then 4 informational posts. So we did do a decent amount of work in these 21 days. Like, this isn't something that just happened on its own. But the main upshot here again is that, like, if you spend 2, 3, 4 weeks of like really focused effort, a lot of times that's enough to like get the ball rolling, build the foundation, especially if you're invisible, like today, or you basically feel like you're invisible. You can make pretty big strides in a lot of cases with just sort of some of this foundational work. And then from there, you can really start to stack the wins by investing in filling some of those content gaps, extending some of your content to sort of complete the journey progression and sort of establish the full narrative around your brand and connect it to the problems that you solve and the solution categories in which you compete. All of those things, right, that we talked about already. So, okay, those are those are the Q's and the A's for today. Just want to say, if you have questions about AEO, GEO, SEO, any of the acronyms, please feel free to reach out. Happy to answer questions. If you're looking for help, would love to discuss potential partnership, feel free to reach out or check out our website, yesoptimist.com. You can learn more about the work that we do. You can check out the case studies that I mentioned before. You can read some of our articles. You can read all about our framework, the core framework that we've published that talks about how we approach SEO and AEO as an integrated strategy. And yeah, I would love to chat. Otherwise, thank you all so much for being here with me today. Hopefully I was able to answer some of the questions that you have, but if you have additional questions, please, again, feel free to reach out, but also feel free to post them in the chat here. I am likely going to be doing more of these. So I will be collecting more questions for the next organic office hours, and keeping my ear to the ground on LinkedIn and on the calls that I have with prospects and clients and marketing leaders. And I'll try to answer all the questions that you have. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful, and hope to talk to you all soon. Cheers. Thanks.